Hi, I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Jason.
And today we're going to be teaching you how to play the game, The Choice.
The Choice is designed by Reinhard Staupper. It plays between 2 and 4 players. It takes around 20 minutes to play.
Let's dive in and learn how to play. In The Choice, players will be rolling dice and trying to cross off as many coloured and numbered spaces as possible. The more spaces crossed off, the higher your score will be, and the player with the most points will be declared the winner. The fun twist here is that for each individual die, players always have complete freedom whether to use the die for its colour or its number. To set up the game, give each player a sheet of paper from the gamepad and a pencil. Return the gamepad to the box at this point as it will no longer be needed. Players are free to choose which side of the sheet to begin the game on, but both sides will be used during the course of the game. Randomly determine a player to be the first active player and have this person take hold of all 3 dice. Now you are ready to play.
Before we learn how to play, let's take a closer look at the 3 dice included in the game. Each of the dice show the numbers 1 to 6, and each die face also shows a different colour, as shown on the colours around the board over here. We have red, yellow, green, blue, purple and grey. However, the number and the colour combinations on each die face is different on each die. For example here, if we look at all the 6s, we have 3 6s, but we have a blue, green and a red. Keep this in mind as we learn how to play. To start the turn, the active player takes all 3 dice and gives them a roll. If they are happy with their roll, play moves on to the next step. But the active player always has the choice to re-roll any or all of the dice one more time in hopes for a better result. They can choose to re-roll just 1 of the dice, 2 of the dice, or even all 3 of the dice. But the active player must make this choice before rolling the dice. So for the sake of example, let's say I'm happy with this 1 and 4 and I want to re-roll this dice. So I give it a roll, and now these are the dice that we're all going to use for the next step of the game. A little note here, the active player is allowed to pick up and check the individual die faces before choosing to re-roll the dice. Once the active player finishes rolling the dice, play moves to the next step where everyone at the table will use the rolled dice to mark spaces on their own individual player sheets. Each player can use as many dice as they wish to mark colour and or number spaces on their score sheet. Ideally, a player would aim to use all 3 dice. However, if they wanted to, a player could just use 2, 1 or no dice at all. This is the point where the players have complete freedom to use the dice how they wish. The goal of the game, of course, is to cross off as many of the spaces on your sheet as possible. The more coloured spaces you cross off, the higher your score will be here, and the more numbered spaces you cross off, the higher your score will be here. The 2 areas on your score sheet, the colours and numbers, are completely separate and are scored separately. At the start of the game, no spaces will be crossed off, so initially when it comes to marking a space, either in the colours or numbers, you can mark any space by using a corresponding die. Let's take a look now at the colour spaces around the outside of the board. Let's say for example I want to use all 3 dice in the colours over here. Nothing's been marked off so far, so maybe I use the red here on this dice to mark off this red space here. After you have marked off a coloured space, all future colour spaces that the player wishes to cross off must be next to an existing crossed off space. Therefore, all your crosses must be connected. You are completely free to cross off spaces in any direction you like. So to continue this example, I've used this red 6 here. I now have a green and a purple, and luckily the green and the purple are either side of this marked red space. So I could use those dice here like this. And now, with these 3 dice, I've marked off 3 coloured spaces. Let's rewind my example and take a look at the number spaces in the centre. So for this turn, I've already used a red dice to mark off this space here. The number spaces in the centre of your sheet are crossed off by using a value from a single die or combining several dice together to make a new number. For example here, at the start of the game, I've got no numbers crossed off, so I can cross off the number 1 here if I wanted to, or use the 4 to cross off this number 4. However, in this case, I'm going to combine the 2 dice together to make the number 5 and cross off the number 5 up here. Once you do cross off your first number in the centre of your sheet, you should clearly circle this space as your starting space. Now, unlike the colour spaces, when crossing off numbers, all future crossed off spaces must connect to the previously crossed off number, forming a sort of route from the starting space. So for the sake of example, in a future round, if I want to cross off another number, I've started here on the number 5, I would need to make a number 2, a 7 or an 11 on dice in order to cross off the next number. Let's say that I did actually roll this again in the future. If I combine all of the numbers together, 1, 4 and 6, I make the number 11, and I can draw a line from this space to the number 11. Now once again, if I want to cross off another number, I have to extend from this line, so the next number I can cross off is a 12 or a 7. As you can see, this will make a kind of route across your numbers. This line must not have any gaps and must not touch or cross itself, so it's very possible to block some numbers from being crossed off entirely.
Each player is completely free to decide whether to use a dice for its colour or for its number. A player can cross up to 3 colour spaces or up to 3 number spaces. Any mix of crossing off colour spaces and marking number spaces is also allowed. When using several numbers from the dice, the numbers can be used individually or be combined to a new number by adding them together. Let me give you some examples. Let's say I've just rolled these 3 dice. We could use the colours, so we've got a blue here, a grey here, and then a connecting purple. We could also use numbers, so we're at the 7, we could go to the 5 and the 4 using these 2 dice. Remember, we have to use all our dice, so we've crossed off these 2. We still have this dice to use, which we could then do here, the blue. There are lots and lots of different options you can use. The best thing is always to have a little look, try and try again. The possibilities are extremely varied, especially at the beginning of the game. Each player has the choice of where to start and how to continue. It is important to note that each die may only be used once by each player, either as a number or as a colour. Do not forget, everyone at the table is also using the same dice that have been rolled. When all players have finished crossing colour and number spaces, the next player in clockwise order will become the active player, and play will continue as described, rolling the dice once, potentially re-rolling some or all of the dice, and then everyone using the dice to cross off spaces on their own sheets. You may have noticed on your sheets that there are spaces here which are for marking misthrows. The active player should try to use all 3 dice to cross off spaces on their sheets. If they use fewer dice, for example only 2, 1 or no dice, they must mark a misthrow on the right side of their paper, like this. All non-active players should aim to use at least 2 dice. Even better, of course, is using all 3. If a non-active player uses less than 2 dice, for example only 1 or no dice at all, they must also mark a misthrow on the right side of their paper. As soon as a player has marked their 3rd misthrow, they must score their board. In other words, they must calculate the points for the board and write this down in the white scoring box on the right of their sheet. They then turn their player sheet over and start on their second game sheet from the next roll of the die, as already described. Just a note, each player is allowed to voluntarily end their first game sheet and score after a dice action has been carried out, even if they do not yet have 3 misthrows. However, this does not apply to a player's second board. The second sheet must be ended by 3 misthrows. End of game and scoring. As soon as any player has marked 3 misthrows on their second board, the game ends. The game also ends when a player has marked all 16 colour spaces and all 13 number spaces on their second player sheet. Note, it can happen that a player is still playing on their first sheet while another player has already finished their second sheet due to 3 misthrows. Each player will now score both sheets, possibly only scoring 1 if they're still playing on the first sheet. Each sheet is scored as follows. The points scored for marked number spaces are listed in the long table at the bottom right of the paper. The more number spaces that form the line, the more points a player will receive. In this case, we've gone from 3 to 11, 7 and 6. We have scored 5 number points, which gives us 7 points altogether. The points for colour spaces are listed in the small table at the bottom left of the paper. If less than 7 colour spaces have been crossed, no points will be scored. 7 or more crossed will give you 8 points. Crossing 10 or more will give you 13 points. Crossing 13 or more will score you 18 points. And if you manage to cross all 16 spaces, the player scores a massive 25 points. In this case, we have scored, for 10 crosses, we get 13 points. In my case, I score 13 plus 7 on this side of the paper. Each player adds up the points from both sides of the sheet, and the player with the most points will be the winner. And that's how you played the choice.
We hope you have loads of fun playing.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.